Okay, so this is part one of a series that I'm doing called Magical Techniques, and in this series what I plan to do is produce one video per topic, and I just want to talk about different magical techniques, and this video is going to be focusing on the art of scrying. So I have some objects here that I want to show you. I'm going to talk about, give a little bit of history on the practice of scrying, and then I'm going to go through some examples of some of the different tools that you can use for scrying, and I'm also going to talk about a few other techniques as well that I am aware of. So scrying isn't something that I practice a great deal, but it is something that I have some experience with, and to begin with I would say that probably the first example most of us will ever see of scrying is when we're children and we watch Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and we're all familiar with the image of the wicked stepmother and her magic mirror. Well, what she's doing there is she's scrying when she communicates with the spirit in her mirror. And you know, lots of fairy tales and works of fantasy are based or grounded in some kind of truth, some kind of magical practice that has been historically has been something that people have practiced. And scrying basically is the art of staring or gazing into some kind of object or some kind of surface and experiencing, receiving information through being in a light trance state whilst gazing or staring into a particular object, whether it's a mirror or a crystal ball or the night sky or a body of water at night or a well. Anything that's dark or slightly reflective surfaces tend to be used. And basically all of the tools that are used in scrying kind of trick the mind into sending you into this trance state just by gazing or staring into the surface of whatever it is that you're using. It puts you into a meditative, relaxed state where you open up your senses, your psychic senses, and you can receive the information in different ways, and it depends on your own skills and your own natural talents and abilities. So for example, you may actually see a vision or an image of something appearing in front of you on the surface of the speculum or tool that you're using, literally as if it's a television screen, or you may receive the information clairaudiently, so you may hear voices or words. You may experience the information with your inner sight. So for example, you may find after gazing into, say for example, a crystal ball for a few minutes, your eyelids may become very heavy, and you may just find that you naturally close your eyes and then you experience visions or information with your inner sight. So you may hear and see things with your eyes closed. So there's different ways that the information can be given to you. Now, some people, when they scry, literally just gaze into an object to see what happens, what wants to reveal itself to them. But many people will do it with a particular purpose in mind, a question or an issue that they want some kind of insight on. It's been used for many things. People sometimes use scrying to spy on somebody. I'm sure we've all seen fantasy films and children's films when we were kids of a witch or a wizard spying on somebody in their crystal ball. Well, that is actually again rooted in a practice that some people do engage in. Other people work with their scrying devices in a much more ceremonial way, because there are actually entire systems of magic which are built around the practice of scrying, and with these systems they actually will conjure or evoke, if you like, a particular entity or spirit into the vessel to communicate with them. And some people, some folk magicians and folk witchy type people may actually work with these spirits on a very regular basis and actually build up a relationship with them, and sort of so that these spirits become their, in a way, a familiar spirit or their go-to spirit whenever they have an issue. One spirit that was made popular, well, not just made popular with this book, but one spirit that is, I think, has made an impact with some people, is a goetic spirit. Now, the goetic spirits are demons, and I personally haven't worked with them, but some people may be up for that. The spirit I'm talking about is the spirit called Visago. That's the Sigil of Visago. This is in the book Mastering Witchcraft by Paul Hewson. This is a great book. It was written in the 70s. It's, as with a lot of good books on witchcraft, the magic in the book is actually drawn from all kinds of different places. So it has mixtures of ceremonial magic and bits of folk magic in there, and planetary magic. And this guy, Visago, is one of the goetic spirits in the Goetia, which is the lesser key of Solomon, or the Lemegeton, and which is a grimoire, by the way, in case you weren't aware. This is a spirit that can help a lot with divination and answering questions and acquiring psychic knowledge. This book actually inspired a lot of films made in the 70s that had a witchcraft theme. There's a film called The Season of the Witch, which features a woman who is practicing witchcraft, and everything she practices comes from this book. And there is actually a scene where she conjures this entity known as Visago, but they actually changed the name to Virago because I think it's like a whole kind of superstitious thing that some Hollywood films do, which I think actually makes a lot of sense. It's actually quite sensible, where they actually change the name of any entities that the actors or actresses are conjuring in case the real entity does actually show up, or based on a fear of that they may actually do something. So yeah, they actually kind of changed the name, but it is this particular spirit that she's supposed to be calling upon. There's also another 70s film which is really entertaining called Blood Orgy of the She-Devils, and that's about a big fabulous witch in the 70s who lives in this big mansion. I think it's somewhere in LA, and there's all of these women in her mansion who are all glamorous 70s looking women with lots of false eyelashes and big hair, and there's a scene in there where they all conjure Visago in the mirror. So yeah, Visago may be a spirit that you're interested in, maybe just researching if you don't actually want to work with him. As I say, I haven't worked with him, but I thought I would put that in there. And as I say, there are entire systems of magic which are built around the practice of scrying. Enochian magic is a very good example. Enochian magic is a system of magic that was discovered or developed, if you like, by Dr. John Dee, who was Queen Elizabeth I's astrologer, and his scryer was Edward Kelly. And basically these two guys would get together and they would conjure angels, or the Enochian entities, which are supposed to be angels, and they would communicate with them through the mirror. They would use various symbols, the mirror or the show stone that they would use. You can actually see the actual show stone that they used, which, by the way, a show stone is just the name for like a scrying, like a crystal ball. You can actually see that, I believe, in the British Museum in London, and it's made of beryl, if I remember correctly. They conjured and communicated with these Enochian entities, and they actually channeled an entire alphabet and a language which is supposed to be the language of the angels. And their magical procedures, I think it would be Dr. John Dee who would actually be he would do the conjurations, and then Edward Kelly would be the scryer, and Edward Kelly would describe everything he was seeing and experiencing, and Edward Kelly would record this. But just to backtrack slightly, I just wanted to say that with scrying, like many ancient magical techniques, is something that is so ancient, and its origins go back right into primitive human history, that I think it's actually impossible to give one culture or one place as being where this art was discovered. I think, as with a lot of ancient magical arts, it's something that human beings just discover for themselves naturally. all over the world. There are so many magical techniques that you find if you study magic that are exactly the same as techniques practiced in completely opposite ends of the, opposite areas of the planet. And it doesn't necessarily mean that these cultures actually came into contact with one another. I think that people do actually discover these things for themselves because it's just so natural. So because it's so ancient, I would hazard a guess that probably the first instances of scrying that people experienced would be at night gazing into a body of water, or simply staring at the ceiling when you're lying in bed at night. Because a lot of people will, if they're staring at the ceiling at night and the room's completely dark, you may start to receive images or visions when you're in that state, because you're in a mild trance-like state there. Lots of people report seeing flashes of colours or hazy blobs of colour across their field of vision when they're staring at the ceiling at night, or into any dark surface. It's something that most people can get something out of, but a lot of people with scrying, they actually get to a point where they kind of hit a brick wall and they don't go further. But like anything, it takes practice. So I just want to talk about the tools I've got here. So here I have a black mirror. Some people call them witches' mirrors. I made this myself. Well, I say made, it wasn't really much effort. I bought the picture frame, and then I took the glass out of the picture frame and painted the back of the glass black. And you have to do a couple of coats, maybe 2 or 3 coats of black paint, and then you put it back in, and hey presto, you've got a black mirror. And this black screen is just perfect for scrying. To be honest, this mirror is a bit on the small side. I find personally, with scrying, the bigger surface you've got, the easier it is. Related to this, I can say that a more modern scenario is something that you find people doing is using television screens to scry into. Especially these days when people have widescreen TVs, they're actually perfect for scrying. So you might want to try that. You don't actually need to spend any money to practice scrying. There's a lot of different tools that you can use which are very, very cheap, which I'll go into a bit more very soon. I also have crystal balls here. These are actually glass. A lot of crystal balls are actually glass, but some people you can actually buy real crystal balls, but if you want something really clear, glass is perfect. This was the first one I ever got. I love this colour. I find it very conducive for psychic work. And this one is labradorite. This has the flash there. Labradorite has an association with psychic powers and intuition and dreams anyway, because it's a form of moonstone which has a lot of psychic connections. So that's a good stone to have a sphere in. Here I have this is a piece of clear quartz crystal. I don't know if you can see very well, but the back of it is rounded, and it has like a slightly kind of a weird smooth yet powdery kind of effect, like a pebble. And then this part is flat, and this is like a screen or a window. I know people that scry into these. When you see crystals like this, I've seen clear quartz and rose quartz in this form. The reason they look like this is because they've been formed this way because they've been sitting in rivers and streams for a very long period of time, and that's the effect that it creates on them. I have here a piece of rainbow obsidian. Obsidian has a very ancient history, a very, very ancient historical connection with the art of scrying. Obsidian is has a lot of associations in, I think it's Aztec mythology. You hear about the smoking mirror. People used obsidian for a lot of different things, for ritualistic and magical purposes. But obsidian is a form of volcanic glass, and a lot of people use this for scrying still to this day. You can buy mirrors which are specifically made from obsidian, like a sort of a round disc of obsidian. Some people create very beautiful ones set into frames. So those are some of the tools I wanted to show. Also, just a regular mirror. You can use a mirror if you set it in a darkened room at night and have maybe one candle or flanking it as they are with this mirror. It's important not to have the flame of the candle or candles reflecting actually in the surface, because that will distract you. You just want to have a bit of light. And basically you gaze into this portal that you've created. You can do it with a specific question in mind, or if you're just experimenting, you might just stare into it and see what you can see. I know some teachers, some of my teachers in the past have said to me that they don't advise that because they feel that you're opening yourself up to anything, which sounds a bit Hollywood, really. But yeah, some people feel that it's dangerous, or not necessarily dangerous, but not recommended. So a lot of people advise actually doing it with a specific question in mind. Scrying is something that can be used for many different purposes. You can use scrying in rituals just to obtain glimpses of some of the spirits or deities that you're working with. You might like to ask a deity to reveal him or herself to you, or communicate with you a message through your scrying device. For example, especially if you're working with a deity that has a connection with psychism or visions, so for example the goddess Hecate, if you're doing a ceremony with the goddess Hecate, you might want to sit down and then use a scrying device in one part of your ceremony and ask her if she has a message to give to you. Obviously that's just one example of many. Other things that you can scry into, I've mentioned television screens, which is some people find a bit unusual, but it's a modern, obviously it's a more modern idea, but it definitely works. Other things that you can scry into would be any kind of dark liquid. Now, some people will, another thing that's quite traditional is to pour water into a cauldron. If you pour water into a cast iron cauldron, the water appears black, and you can scry into that. If you are familiar with any witchcraft books by Doreen Valiente, she actually includes a scrying ritual where you toss a silver coin into a cauldron of water under the light of the moon, and there's a little invocation that you use, and then you can scry into that with a particular question in mind. You can also use any other kind of bowl filled with water. For example, this bowl is quite effective. It's a dark blue ceramic bowl. Pouring water into there would be fine. If you have a glass bowl or a bowl that doesn't really change the colour of the water, through some kind of optical illusion, you can just add some ink. That's quite traditional. So you can add a few drops of ink, or maybe even paint, black paint, to the water. Basically, so you have a dark liquid that has a nice smooth surface over the top. You can scry into red wine. You can scry into Coca-Cola. I know that Alexander's, the founder, or co-founder of the Alexandrian tradition of witchcraft, he was known to scry sometimes into a pint of Guinness when he was at the pub. He actually found the froth useful for scrying into. I'm not quite sure how, but yeah, any kind of dark liquid is useful. I think he found the froth useful in the way that people read tea leaves. It kind of creates shapes and you interpret the shapes. So that's not really scrying, but if you're staring into the actual liquid itself, then you can scry into that. Other things, one of the most unusual things I've heard of people using for scrying, and I can't remember where I read this, but as soon as I read it, it stuck in my head. Apparently sadhus, some of the holy men in India, who leave their families and their material life and their worldly possessions, and they just go off and wander around for years and years on a mission to find God and attain moksha, or enlightenment, and to break free of the chain of the cycle of life, death and rebirth, so they don't have to reincarnate again. Quite a lot of those people apparently scry in their thumbnail, because they they don't have many possessions. They literally have the clothes or robes that they're wearing, and then maybe some prayer beads and a begging bowl, and that's it. So the thumbnail apparently they use, and I can't remember where I read that, but that has stayed with me ever since I read it, because I just thought it was really quite amusing, because to me that would just seem too small to scry into, but obviously it works for them, so it might work for you. It may even help actually if you paint your thumbnail black, because then your thumbnail would be like a small scrying mirror. One other thing that I wanted to mention with scrying is that if you work with elemental magic and you work with elemental beings, you can actually scry into physical representations of the four elements. So I've known people to literally scry into a bowl filled with earth, filled with soil or dirt, and actually scrying into that as a way of obtaining visions of the elemental spirits of the earth, which for most people they refer to as the gnomes. You can scry into incense, clouds of incense, to communicate with air elementals. You can scry into the flame of a candle or into a bonfire or a fire in a fireplace to obtain visions of the salamanders, the elemental spirits of fire. And of course, as I've said, you can use water as well. I mean, with all of these elemental methods of scrying, you don't have to do it just to have visions of the elemental. You can use it as a form of scrying in general. Like scrying into the flames of a fire in a bonfire or a fireplace. You can use that to obtain information about anything. You could use that to scry into to find out information about anything. It doesn't have to be necessarily work with fire elementals or the symbolism of fire, but it could help. So, for example, if you wanted to do that, you could perhaps use water to scry into if you have any issues concerning emotions or love or relationships. And then maybe you could scry into earth to perhaps obtain visions or information about more worldly material concerns like your job or your finances or your career. With incense, this is actually some scrying incense I just have it here to remind me to talk about this. With the tools that you use, obviously, you consecrate them in whichever way you're comfortable with, or whichever method you've been taught or pertains to your tradition. Most Wiccans consecrate, all Wiccans consecrate any tools they use in magic with the four elements and to their gods. Wafting it in the incense, in an incense like this would be really appropriate because it's a scrying incense. It's made from herbs which have an association with psychic powers. A note about herbs, actually. One method that you can use to cleanse or empower a tool that is being used for scrying, especially crystal balls, although you could do it with mirrors, but you need to be a bit more careful, is to make an infusion of mugwort. Mugwort has a real connection with, I believe, with the moon, but it definitely has a connection with dreams and visions and psychic powers and scrying. So I've done this before in the past. You can make a brew, literally boil some water and put some dried mugwort into it. Let it steep for a good while, so that the actual juices of the mugwort go into the water. And then you can strain that mixture and put your crystal ball directly into the bowl of water and leave it there for a while to steep, maybe overnight. Or you can actually wash the tool. So especially if you're doing it with a mirror, you'd take a cloth and wipe this infusion over the mirror, and that would be seen as a way of kind of charging it up and making it more potent. I think when I used the mugwort infusion method, I actually I used a crystal ball and I actually sat it into the infusion and then left that bowl out to capture the rays of the moon. Moonlight is, perfect for that. If you do charge anything with moonlight, you have to make sure that you wake yourself up in time to snatch the object away before the sun rises, because if you just leave it there overnight, as soon as the sun comes up and the rays of the sun hit it, it undoes the work. So you'd need to do it again. So this is another thing I want to mention, actually, is that a lot of people keep their scrying tools, so their crystal balls and their mirrors, a lot of people keep them covered up during the day, or just when not in use as well. It's a good idea to just keep them all put away in a drawer. If you want to get really traditional, you can do the whole thing of wrapping it up in silk, which is something that a lot of Western magical practitioners do with their magical tools in general. When they're not in use, they keep them wrapped in silk, and they say that this preserves its magical charge. But if you don't want to use silk, you can just literally put it somewhere where it's not going to receive any daylight. Because I remember that being told and having read as well that if you're using an infusion of mugwort on a tool, for example, once it's been consecrated with that, then it's good for a month, but then it will wear off, so you'd need to do it again. But I don't personally use scrying very often, so it's not something that I do. But if I was doing a lot of heavy scrying, then definitely I would really take care of the tool itself, and I would make sure that I would keep it charged up and keep it out of the sunlight. It's daylight as I'm making this video now, but none of these tools are actually being used. I've had these for years, some of these things. It's more for demonstration purposes, really. As far as the actual technique of scrying goes, once you've got your question, or you're in a ritual and you've actually contacted a being that you want to communicate with, just sit in front of the tool and focus on your breathing for a while. Do some slow, deep, rhythmic breathing, some meditation, anything to get you into a relaxed, receptive state, very, very calm and quiet, and then focus into the screen of the mirror or the crystal ball. And the best way that I've known people to describe the actual process of gazing into the object is very similar to those magic eye optical illusions that were very popular in the 90s. You kind of stare at the surface for a while, but then you kind of visualize, you imagine that you're actually looking inside it, so you're going beyond the surface, and then kind of wander into that state and then see what impressions come to you. It's quite difficult to describe, but if you just practice gazing into it in a relaxed way, not gazing at the surface of it, but trying to blur your gaze so you're actually kind of going inside it, then you'll understand what I mean. With a crystal ball, the best way to do it, in my experience, is to imagine that you're trying to look inside the actual centre of the ball. So you're not looking on the surface, you're kind of blurring your gaze so that your attention is wandering inside the ball, but not all the way around to the back of it. So you kind of keep your attention into the centre of the ball. It's actually, a lot of people find it easier than it sounds. What will happen with when you're doing scrying, most people find that the mirror or the crystal ball or the liquid, whatever they're using, it mists over. It literally looks like a fog, kind of, or a haze that goes over it. It might be white, it might be grey, it might be any other kind of flashing kind of aura colour. And then once you get that, a lot of people say that they maintain, obviously you may need to practice this, but you maintain this, you maintain your gaze, and after a while the mist clears and then the information comes through, whether it's a vision that you actually see on the surface of the speculum or something that comes to you with your inner sight or audibly. So I think I've covered everything there. One other thing that you can use in terms of consecrating the tools, obviously I've mentioned incense that is useful for scrying. You could smudge your scrying tool in the smoke of scrying incense or any kind of psychic vision blend. You can also anoint the tool every time you use it with a psychic vision oil. That's a hoodoo recipe, but there are many companies which produce magical oil blends, or you can find them for yourself to make your own in books, and you can make an oil blend from different botanicals which have an association with the moon or with psychism. I'll talk more about oils in another video, but there is an oil that you see in a lot of esoteric shops, which the name of which I believe is actually a hoodoo recipe, but yeah, it's called psychic vision oil. You may see oil called third eye oil or just psychic oil, but all of these oils are great to use to anoint a scrying object with. One other thing I've forgotten to mention, with the scrying mirror, something that's very traditional and looks really amazing, because I have a friend who has one. If you want to make a magic mirror but you want it to look a bit more dramatic and step things up a bit, if you purchase a clock face, like a grandfather clock face, so you have that big piece of glass, it's convex on one side and concave on the other, and you paint the back of that black, again, do several coats, you put it back into the frame, and then you've got this massive black surface that has a natural kind of dip into it. That is perfect for scrying. Not just the shape of it, but also the size of it as well. And you can, of course, with that, and also with a mirror, you can decorate the frame around the surface. I mean, this is silver already when I bought it, so that that was one of the reasons I went for it, because silver has a connection with the moon, of course, and with psychic powers. But you can paint it. You can maybe glued gemstones on there which have an association with psychic powers, like amethysts or moonstones or lapis lazuli, however you prefer to pronounce that. Or you can, excuse me, you could include sigils or seals. If you work with the Seal of Solomon, you might want to use some kind of lunar seal or talisman, and actually have that on the mirror somewhere. It's completely down to you. I would definitely recommend, if you are going to look into decorating it and being more fancy, then definitely check out some books. I mean, this Mastering Witchcraft book, the section on divining and scrying, goes into quite a lot of depth actually on particular symbols you might like to use, including things like Hebrew characters and planetary seals, sigils for planetary spirits and intelligences that you may want to work with in your scrying. But I would definitely say, if you're an absolute beginner, don't bother with any of that. Just focus on having a glass of wine or a black mirror, something very simple, and you can use that perfectly well. One last thing I've just remembered, there is actually, if you wanted to see an example of some of the ceremonial magical traditions which use a lot of scrying and how they actually perform their scrying rituals, there is a ceremonial magician called Poke Runyon, who made a couple of videos. I think he made his, there were DVDs, I think he made them in the early 2000s or the late 90s. I used to have one of his DVDs, but unfortunately I lost it. But I do remember seeing that the whole thing now, or both of the film, documentary type films that he produced, are actually on YouTube. So if I can find them, I'll post the link to one of them underneath this video, because he practices a form of Solomonic magic where they conjure entities into a dark mirror, and it's very, very ceremonial, and they will have their scrying mirror in a triangle of manifestation which is drawn out and is separate from the circle that the magicians are standing in. And they have the mirror, and they have it flanked with the candles, and then they'll have a scryer standing in front of the mirror, and then another magician will actually perform the evocation to the spirit, and then the person scrying will have the vision and then report back what they are finding. That's basically how a lot of those kind of operations go. Obviously there's differences between traditions, but that's the kind of thing that happens. The scrying device is usually placed on top of a sigil of the spirit that's being conjured. And in some traditions as well, you may have somebody standing by with a sword. I've seen, for example, with a crystal ball, holding a sword and pointing it at the crystal to prevent the spirit from jumping out of the vessel. You've got to love this medieval grimoire magic sometimes. So yes, anyway, that's not to be flippant, by the way. I do actually believe in these spirits and think that you do need to take these precautions and follow the rules. But yeah, that's my video on scrying. If anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them underneath the video, and I'll try and reply to them all. And until next time, take care. Bye.